Good morning. So we are at halacha 10, halacha yud, which is the last three halachas, right? Yud Gid Alef Beis, just three halachas to this chapter in the Shulchan Aruch, which is all about the requirement that Kiddush is only a valid Kiddush if it's done in the place of a meal. So first we discussed what does it mean to be in the place of geographically, house to house, room to room within a house, or space to space within the same room. Then we discussed the temporal association between Kiddush and the meal, how soon after, depending on intent. All right, what else did we discuss? We also discussed yesterday what one needs to eat in order to qualify as this meal that's in the presence of the Kiddush. We had essentially is bread or mezainis or another cup of wine. And then that one opinion which said that the cup of wine itself in Kiddush, if it is a full revius, also constitutes as the meal in the place of the Kiddush. And we rely on that only in cases when we need to, like making Kiddush and Shol on Friday night, thank you, when no child is there to drink it, or at a Bris on Shabbos morning when no one else is there to drink the wine. Right, which the footnote, we didn't read it yesterday, but the footnote points out, let's just explain the Bris for a second, because we didn't really spend much time on it yesterday. Let's explain a little bit about that, right? So a Bris is taking place Shabbos morning, and let's assume that the Bris meal is at a different location of the Bris itself. Let's just assume, right?
In the same building.
Let's assume it's in a different building. Let's assume it's in a different building. Doesn't make a difference. Okay, let's just assume it's a different building for now. And
well, if the bris is taking place in the sanctuary and then the meal is eaten in the Kiddush hall.
okay, it's in the same building. Let's just assume it's in a different building. The person's hosting the meal at home. Let's just assume that, right? So now at the Kiddush, at the bris, you hold a cup and you make hagafen and you name the baby, right? So you're making hagafen over this cup in association with the bris, but you haven't made Kiddush yet, which means you cannot drink that cup. You cannot drink before Kiddush. So this is the same exact thing as the person making Kiddush and Shol for the guests, or for the custom that was once to make Kiddush for the guests and Shol on Friday night. There are no guests, so no one's fulfilling their obligation from this Kiddush. Neither are you fulfilling your obligation for this Kiddush, and therefore you can't drink from the Kiddush you are making on Friday night. The solution to both of those cases was to give it to a child, that a child who's above the age of education, who understands what a bracha is, say Amen, and drink the cup of at least some part of the wine, and that way the bracha I made was for the child's drinking.
Now, when you say over the age of education, you're talking with bar mitzvah?
No, that would be an adult, halachically.
6 or 7.
Something like that, somewhere between 6 and 9, depending on the level of the child's intelligence. Yeah, so that would be the solution for the bris wine and for the Kiddush and Shol wine. If there's no child, so someone has to drink that wine, otherwise that bracha hagafen was a bracha in vain, both at the bris as well as at the Kiddush and Shol. So the Kiddush and Shol, we said how the solution is the person himself drink a full revius, and that way he has fulfilled his obligation for Kiddush. Now, as for the fact that his Kiddush has to be in the place of a meal in order for the Kiddush to be valid, that full cup he just drank, at least according to that one opinion, is considered the meal in the place of his Kiddush. So we're relying on this one opinion in the circumstance where we have no choice. Ordinarily, you drink a second cup of wine to fulfill this, to satisfy the halacha of having a meal in the place of your Kiddush. In this case, where you only have one cup of wine, that very cup you're drinking is itself the Kiddush in the place of your meal, is the meal in which your Kiddush was in the presence of. And you're relying on that opinion because you have no other choice.
Now, hearing Kiddush is enough, or you have to partake in having a sip of wine from the Kiddush you just heard from?
Okay, it's not a directly related question, because here we're talking about the Kiddush in the place of your meal,
right?
But the halacha is no, you don't have to drink anything. The amen is all you have to do. Amen is all you have to do. We do drink the wine, but it's not obligatory. But we'll get more to that when we get to the next chapter in the Shulchan Aruch after we finish the Gemara on that. We'll discuss the laws of Kiddush. Yeah.
Thinking, in the case of the bread, isn't there something a little bit different than the Friday night?
Oh, so I want to get to why.
It's a mitzvah. The mitzvah of drinking the bread. So
Okay.
Wouldn't that maybe be an exception?
Okay, let's now. So that's what the footnote points out.
Okay.
That the Alter Rebbe now adds another Kiddush here. When it comes to Friday night, it's easy. The person's making Kiddush, and he's relying on the opinion which says that the cup of wine he's drinking now, because it's a complete revius, constitutes the meal that he's making the Kiddush in the presence of. Yeah, relying on that one opinion because of the circumstances. Okay, when it comes to the bris, however, what's he making a guffin for? First of all, the bris is never Friday night, it's always during the day. Yeah, it's always during the day. Kiddush by day is how many brachas? One, just hagafen. Right? There's no bracha, no other bracha. Friday night you have the bracha of hagafen and the bracha of Shabbos, sanctifying the day of Shabbos. Kiddush by day only has one bracha, just hagafen. There's lots of other words you say, but there's no bracha there. It doesn't say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Mekadesh HaShabbos. You don't say that Shabbos day. Okay, which means what's the Alter Rebbe telling us? The guy's making the bracha on his wine by the bris. There's no child to drink the wine. So he drinks it and has in mind that the wine he's drinking is the meal in the presence of his kiddush. You didn't just make kiddush, you made a bracha hagafen for a bris. So which means Alter Rebbe is teaching us that in theory you can make a one hagafen and cover that both for the bris and for the kiddush. That's what he's doing here. He's making the cup of wine for the bris, but because he don't want to drink before kiddush, he's taking that same cup of wine and wrapping it into his kiddush, and then that revius that he drinks is the meal in the presence of his kiddush. So one cup is satisfying three things. It's satisfying the hagafen associated with the bris. It's satisfying the hagafen for your kiddush, and it's satisfying the meal in the presence of which you're making your kiddush.
But you're not in the presence of a meal.
That cup of wine is your meal. If it's a revius, according to this one view, which we're relying on given the extraneous circumstances. Ordinarily, we wouldn't rely on it, but in these two cases, the Kiddush Friday night and the bris, we're relying on it. Right? So there's a big Kiddush here. And one bracha is doing three things at once. Follow? So there's a little Kiddush there. When it comes to the bris, there actually is two brachas. There's the bracha hagafen, and there's the bracha for sanctification of the bris. Asher Kiddush yidid bibeten. Right? There's a bracha we make.
Yeah.
Right. Besides the baby naming, there's two paragraphs. There's a baby naming and there's a bracha. The person holding the hagafen actually is making the bracha too. So which means I assume what the person would have to do is the person would have to say all the preparatory lines we say. I'm guessing this is what we have to do. For day kiddush at the bris, he have to first say the baby naming, hold the cup of wine, make the baby naming, then say all the lines that we say prior to our kiddush. Then say hagafen for his kiddush, and for the next bracha, which is the bracha over the bris. And then he would drink the cup of wine, a full revius, and that full revius would be the meal in the presence of his kiddush, which was also the bracha over the bris.
So does the siddur have, if it's Saturday?
No, because you're best. Pass the siddur. Let's see. Pass the siddur. Let's have a look. Good morning. But I don't know that it has that because the best case scenario is to have the bris in the same place where the meal is, and then you avoid all of this. Right? So where's the bris's page? I don't know where it is. 490 something. I made 6 bris, and I should remember by now.
I think most brises are in the same place where the meal will be taking place. I mean,
Yeah, but on Shabbos it gets complicated. Some people want to. I don't know. Who knows what people's cheshbonos are? I was actually just reading yesterday because we're doing on Shabbos. We're learning about Rashi. So I just read yesterday a responsa from Rashi, where there's a scenario where they had the wedding in Rashi's house on Friday afternoon, and then the wedding meal was the Friday night meal in someone else's house, and they forgot to make an eruv, and they come to Rashi for a solution. How do we carry from here to there? And people have all kinds of the chuppah was in his house and the meal was somewhere else.
Right. But that's a common thing.
But Rashi himself was invited to the wedding, so how to make the eruv, whatever. Sorry.
But that's a common thing.
I understand. So say people have all kinds of considerations as to why they make their meals wherever they are. Okay, so there's the bracha over the bris that the father makes at the actual bris, but then there's the next bracha which you make, Asher Kiddush Beten, which is it's also bracha over the bris. It doesn't say anything here about. It doesn't say anything about what you do if it's Shabbos. Okay, so let's go forward now. Now we get to halacha yud aleph and yud beis. We get to the ability of one person making kiddush for someone else. We discussed that already a little bit before. We said already that I could make in halacha, what was it? In halacha 6, right? That a person can make kiddush even though I'm not fulfilling the kiddush. That I'm making the bracha for someone else, and the other person's doing the drinking, and the other person's having the meal, and then I go somewhere else and make kiddush for myself and eat somewhere else. We use the example of the hospital, where I make kiddush for someone else. The kiddush is for them. The bracha is for them. So I have not fulfilled my obligation anything. Therefore, I don't have to eat anything. In fact, I'm not allowed to eat anything because I haven't made kiddush yet. And then I go home and make my own kiddush and my own meal. Right? That's what we discussed. So now we're going to get more halachas about that, but even more extreme. Namely, halacha yud. In kiddush b'soich b'esai, if I made kiddush in my own home, and my neighbor heard hakiddush mimenu, the kiddush from him, from me, and he is in his own home. And his table is set before him. Because he is planning on eating right there, right then, his meal. So two neighbors are both having Shabbos meal. And one person makes kiddush in his house, and the other person is at his table, about to have his meal. So that neighbor fulfills his obligation. He's hearing the kiddush in the place of his meal. So even though the kiddush and the meal is happening in a different place, but by extension of the fact that I can hear someone else's kiddush, answer amen, and that becomes my kiddush. So where's the kiddush happening? Wherever I listen and hear and say amen.
But does it say anything about having to see? Or?
We'll get to the more details about that. We're going to get to that. Right? So and this, by the way, is derived from the law of the kiddush in shul, right? The kiddush in shul, when we explained that you're not allowed to eat in the shul, which means the guests have a room directly adjacent to the hall, to the shul. So they're standing in the room where they're eating. A person's making kiddush in that room, and it's as if the kiddush was done in their place because they are listening to the kiddush from their room where they're eating, even though it's the same building, and here it's 2 different buildings, but the same principle. Follow? Mm-hmm. In other words, the kiddush is being fulfilled where I answer amen, not where the person's making it. Mm. So I answer amen here, even though the kiddush is being made there. In my answering amen, made kiddush in my spot, so I can eat right here, and my kiddush was done in the spot of my meal.
So if you're in the Kiddush hall and Kiddush is being said in the sanctuary, you're listening to the Kiddush in the Kiddush hall, you're fulfilling the mitzvah.
Okay, so in that scenario, that's why the rabbi opens the door and the rabbi eats something out of space. Okay, so that way the whole thing is being done in the space of the Kiddush, in the space of the meal.
What?
That's why the rabbi does that.
When we kind of separate.
Sorry?
When people were in separate rooms during
COVID, yeah.
They were not
so but they were eating in their spot where they heard Kiddush. Right? Exactly like the scenario. They're in their spot, they're hearing Kiddush, say, amen, and they eat in that spot.
If somebody is outside, if we're davening in here,
yeah,
we're, let's say, 9 davening in here, and the 10th person is outside the room.
You're talking about a minyan, it's not the same thing as hearing Kiddush in your spot. You don't need a minyan here for Kiddush.
No, I understand we don't need a minyan, but the person is not part of the minyan. He's not part of what's happening inside this room.
Again, when I hear Kiddush in my house,
mm-hmm.
and I answer, amen, where did the Kiddush happen?
In your house.
I didn't make Kiddush, you made Kiddush in your house. So why is it happening in my house?
Heard it?
Because I answered amen in my house.
You're not going to be able to hear if I'm saying that. But...
Hypothetical. I'm answering amen in my house. The Kiddush happened in my house because I answer amen.
For example,
so he's in that place, he answers amen. You're right, he's not part of a minyan because he's in the other place. And it's exactly consistent with what's happening here. Where I'm answering amen in someone else's place. It's happening in the other place where I'm answering amen. It's perfectly consistent.
You could, if you picture it, you could do like a semi-detached house.
Yeah.
The 2
bungalow colonies happens all. I'm sure it can happen all the time. It's not a leniency. It's the fact that I answer amen in my spot. That's where my kiddush happened. My kiddush happened in the place where I said amen, even though I wasn't the one who verbalized the actual kiddush. Because my amen is me saying.
Have to be in the room where that's the same thing, I guess.
That's the point.
Where they're either sitting it or where they're hearing.
Exactly. That's the point.
Is where
That's right. Where I answer amen is where my kiddush happens. That's right.
And there's no exception here that says if it's because you can't do it, if not, you have the responsibility.
Okay, let's see. Let's see. Even though the person reciting the kiddush is in a different place, he's in a different house, there's no issue here. It's of no consequence. Because the point is, where I answered amen, that's where my kiddush happened, even though I heard it from somewhere else.
So they both fulfill where they are.
Correct.
Eat where they are.
Correct. Him because he recited it, and me because I said amen. That's right. Who, and this is only true, if the one reciting the kiddush had the intent to cover his obligation too. Who, and he, the listener, is having in mind to fulfill the obligation by that listening.
Does this
Okay.
also apply with the
Let's-
passage? There can't be a public thoroughfare between the two.
Let's keep on reading. We'll see, maybe. Let's look at footnote 39. If either of the individuals do not have this intent, the listener does not fulfill his obligation. Nevertheless, as stated in section 5522, the listener does not have to be in the same place as the person reciting the blessing or prayer in order to fulfill his obligation by listening to that person's recitation. See also section 213.1, which makes similar statements to those of the main text above. Those listening to Kiddush do not have to taste the wine over the Kiddush is recited to answer your question to fulfill their obligation. Even if they wish to partake of their own wine, they may fulfill the obligation for the blessing of Bari Piagofen with the blessing of the person who recited Kiddush. So I can hold my own glass of wine in my house. You're making Kiddush in your place. I say amen, I drink, and that was my Kiddush. Or I don't drink, and that's still my Kiddush because I answered amen.
You didn't say Bari Piagofen.
Nope. I'm answering amen to his Kiddush and to his Agofen. Okay. Sorry, continue.
The
Yeah.
thoroughfare, when I asked before, I think that's only if the person reciting Kiddush
Himself
goes
moved.
to
Yeah.
the other home.
So I don't know if it's consequential here. Yeah, you're right. Okay, now to your question. Vafilu, even, second paragraph on halacha 10, afilu lechatchila, even in the first instance, meaning it's not like only if I can't, even to begin with. Yachal adam lakadosh bebeisai, a person may make kiddush in his own home, kidei sheyishmu shcheinav, with the intent that his neighbors hear him, v'yetzu dechavosin, and they fulfill their obligation. Vafilu him eino oichla dayin, vein yetzu b'kiddush zeh. Now, even if I'm not eating now, and I'm not fulfilling myself with my kiddush, I'm making kiddush for my neighbors who themselves don't know how to make kiddush. Right? So let's make this clear. If I am fulfilling my own obligation in my kiddush, even if my neighbor knows how to make kiddush, it's fine. If I am making kiddush for myself,
And you're eating.
and I'm eating in my spot because I'm fulfilling my obligation for kiddush, my neighbors have no wine, for whatever reason, or
Wow.
whatever, or there's not in the mood of drinking wine, so I can make kiddush loud enough and say, hey, listen up. And he answers, I'm going to fulfill. In this scenario, it's my neighbor doesn't know how to make kiddush. In that case, I don't even have to fulfill my own obligation with the kiddush. My whole kiddush is just for him, just like we had yesterday, the hospital scenario. If the person that's listening to the kiddush doesn't know how to make kiddush,
You could
or is in a
use that
circumstance where they
language
can't, then I can do it for them, even though I'm not fulfilling my obligation now. Right? That was like the hospital scenario we did yesterday. Right? Which they in footnote 40, they tell us, look in subsection 6, which we read yesterday.
Well, this is all just very similar to you doing kiddush for anybody
Oh,
else who can't
the
do it.
unique
Just
feature
you're
here
referring
is,
to here as a neighbor.
the
but
unique halacha here is that when I hear kiddush, even if I'm in a different house from the person saying the kiddush, it's considered kiddush in the place of my meal because I am in the place where my meal is happening, even though I'm hearing it from somewhere else. That's the unique halacha that's being taught to us here, which we didn't know yet.
Now, when we hear Kiddush, let's say in shul,
Yeah.
and then we go from shul to the rabbi's house, and the rabbi will say that everyone hear Kiddush, okay, let's just wash.
Right.
So we're carrying that with us.
Now let's make this clear. Your meal doesn't require kiddush. Your kiddush requires a meal. Not the same thing. You understand?
Okay, that's on Shabbos day,
On Friday night also.
Friday night also.
Correct. You can make kiddush. You have a little bit of mezonus,
Yeah.
and you're done your kiddush obligation. You have your meal 2 hours later, 3 hours later, whatever you want. Wash and have your meal.
Friday night, are we obligated to make a matzah?
You are, but it doesn't have to be directly after your Kiddush. It can be 3 hours later. As long as you fulfilled your obligation to make Kiddush, which is to make Kiddush and have some meal, which we described yesterday, either a piece of cake or like a glass of wine, whatever it is.
And the motzi can be in a different place too.
Different place, yeah, exactly. Make Kiddush at home, have a little cake, and then you go to your parents' house, then wash and have challah. Yeah, okay. Halacha Yud Aleph. Misha Beisai Samach LeBeis HaKnesses. Therefore, someone who's home is near the synagogue. Shama Kiddush B'Seich Beisai, and he heard the Kiddush in his house, Ma'ashliach Tzibur from the Chazan, Shemekadosh B'Beis HaKnesses, who's making Kiddush in Shul. We're talking about the Friday night Kiddush, which again, Chabad we don't do. We discussed this last week, that there is this custom. Friday night, the Chazan makes Kiddush in Shul, and the intent was for guests who are in town eating in Shul. Even though today we have no guests, we still keep the custom going. Right? Now, what if I'm next door and I overhear the Chazan making that Kiddush? Right?
Yeah, the intent.
Yeah.
Oh, so even though I, the listener, have in mind to fulfill my obligation with the Kiddush that the Chazan is making, La Yatza, I've not fulfilled my obligation.
Doesn't have you admonished.
Why?
He didn't
Because
have
nowadays, we have no guests spending the night in Shul or eating in Shul Friday night. The Chazan has no one in mind when he makes that Kiddush. Not the people present and not anybody else. He's only doing it because of the custom, to maintain that which our stage is established. So therefore, I cannot fulfill my obligation in that Kiddush because nobody, no intent in it, right? And you have to have the intent of both the reciter and the listener. Okay. Okay, final halacha. Lachatchila, and this gets to something we talked about way at the beginning. It's not really on our subject because it's not about Kiddush in the place of a meal, but it's somewhat related because it is the place of where your candles are. And that's actually going to come up as well. But it is related because of the story that we learned in the Gemara with Abaye. So what was the Gemara story with Abaye? Let's look this up. There's a footnote there. Right. Oh, you remember the story because this is very interesting now that I just realized that. The story was Abaye said, Abaye was orphaned and grew up in Rabbi's house. Remember we talked about that? Okay.
Yeah.
So Abaye is in Rabbi's house at his adopted father's home, and he was going to eat his meal somewhere else. He was inviting his guests somewhere else. So Rabbi made Kiddush and said, Rabbi himself made Kiddush, and he said, eat something here. And that way you'll fulfill your obligation for Kiddush by eating in the place of a meal, and then go to your guest's house to eat. Now, why should you do that? Because maybe by the time you get there, the light's going to go out, and you won't be able to eat your meal. Now, we assumed that was a practical thing. The light goes out, you can't eat. But actually, it's a halachic thing. You have to eat in the presence of your candles. And if the candles aren't there, your meal is lacking. So you actually, and so Rabbi telling them to eat now here, because A, it's in the place of your Kiddush, and B, it's in the presence of the candles. And when you get there, you'll eat in the dark maybe, but at least you'll have fulfilled your obligation to eat your meal in the presence of your Kiddush and the presence of the lights.
And making Kiddush in front of the candles is a halacha or it's a custom?
It's the halacha. The candles, we spoke about this a few one of the classes, that the candles are there for your meal. That's why they're there.
I only learn on one.
There's the videos to catch up in between. Okay, so what does it say? Therefore, in the first instance, a person must eat his night meal, in the place where the Shabbos candles are burning. That's where he should eat his meal. Even if he's eating his meal during daytime, because he took Shabbos in early. So I have light, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm stuck with this. I have on the one hand, I have an initial preference that I eat my meal in the presence of the candles. So I have to do that. But here in this case, my candles aren't really giving me the value at my meal because I can see anyway. So what are my candles giving value to? They're giving value to the fact that when it gets dark later, I'm not going to bump into anybody else in the house. And therefore, I have to make sure my candles last long enough to actually be available when it's dark. So if you take Shabbos in early, your candles have to last long enough to go into the dark. Nowadays, it doesn't really apply because you have electric lights that we rely on not to bump into anyone. But the candles we have are there for the presence of the meal mainly. So let's see. Even if he's eating his meal during the daytime because he's taking Shabbos in early, he should not eat in the courtyard. Even if he enjoys it more because it's outdoors and he likes the fresh air, or because of the flies. Apparently, flies were more bothersome in your house than out of your house. Right? Right? But if he's very uncomfortable, because his house is way too hot, or because there's too many flies in his home, you may eat in the courtyard even though you cannot see your candles. Why? The candles are there, as we mentioned, to enjoy the Shabbos. But in this case, I'm sitting by my candles and it's making it worse because I'm hot and it's flies. Not for pain. Now, if that's the case, right? So when we spoke about the candles, we explained this. The candles have one of two functions: either to enhance your meal or so that you don't bump into each other when it's dark. Nowadays, we rely on it solely for the meal because we have electric lights not to bump into each other. So we rely on it for the meal to enhance our meal. It adds a romance, it adds an ambiance and whatnot. Now, in this case, the Alter is giving you both options. Best case, have your meal by your candles, even if it's during daytime. If you're not going to have your meal by your candles because having it by your candles is so discomfortable because your house is too hot and there's too many flies, then you have to have the other function for your candles because you didn't have your meal by your candles. So what's the other function? That you don't bump into each other, which means it has to be light long enough when it's dark outside and you're relying on the candles. And therefore he says, you have to be careful, that the candles be long enough, that they should last into the night, so that you don't bump into each other. Gimel is explained in chapter 263, where there it discusses in more detail the laws of Shabbos candles. Here it's only brought up incidentally because we're talking about having Kiddush in the place of your meal. So we're adding this other detail that in the best case scenario, you have your meal in the presence of your candles as well.
Now, even though
Clear?
we have lights today, electric light, why do we drop that custom of having shorter candles?
Why don't we?
Yeah, why do we drop that custom of like, okay, we don't need the candle for light to bump into each other because we have electric light.
So what do we use the candles for then?
Using it for fulfilling the mitzvah of lighting candles.
But what's the mitzvah?
The mitzvah is to have the ambiance and the.
Oh, so you would have to create ambiance.
Right.
If I lit it in my bedroom, or if I lit it in the hallway and I eat somewhere else, it didn't create any ambiance, right? So it has to be in the presence of your meal.
Right.
Which means to us today, we don't have the option of eating away from my candles and relying on the candles that is blocking me from bumping into someone. I have to have my meal at the candles, otherwise the candles was a bracha in vain. We discussed this in a different class, the solutions to that, and how you can get around that if you're not eating at home. What do you do when you're not eating at home? You still want to fulfill the mitzvah of lighting candles, right? We discussed this. You can rely on the electric lights, have that in mind in your bracha, or you can eat later when you come back home.
I find the candles laws very odd or almost
it changes
contradictory to no, not even compared to today. Just the fact that we're supposed to use them is weird compared to other mitzvot or whatever, and the fact that it's that your comfort comes before the mitzvah is also
because the mitzvah is for your comfort. That was the mitzvah. There's a few different times, actually another time.
Right, but that's very subjective. It's not. That's one fly can bother me, and I can leave the house.
That's absolutely correct.
It could be just a yetzirah annoying me to not,
That's absolutely correct. This mitzvah of candles is to enjoy, and there's going to be another mitzvah that we're going to come up to in the laws of Pesach. That's also to enjoy. A wine. You drink the wine at the meal. It's supposed to be done. Derech cheder, you're supposed to enjoy it. So if the wine is too strong, you don't like it, it's a very big question if you fulfilled your obligation. So if you drank a cup of wine during your Seder night, we'll get to this, and the wine was spoiled, you may be required to drink another cup of wine.
I could do that.
Because the wine itself wasn't the mitzvah. The mitzvah was to enjoy the freedom that comes along with wine. If it's
That's what I'm
spoiled, you
saying.
ruin
It
it.
leaves a lot of interpretation. What if
100%.
I can only afford
It
cheap
makes-
wine that doesn't taste good?
That's right. It makes
Am
it.
I out of my mitzvah? Am I not?
It's a very big question, and we're going to get to all of that. That's right, correct. But these are subjective mitzvahs because the mitzvah is defined by
Usually,
my
it's
enjoyment
like
of it.
Fact. You have to do this. You do it.
Right. But here it's for enjoyment. That's correct. Okay, so this gives us the halachas of Kiddush in the place of our meal. And God willing, tomorrow we'll get back to the Gemara, where the Gemara is going to take a tangent on the side to more laws of Kiddush. And those laws of Kiddush are going to last us for another 5 pages or so, and then we'll get back to the Shulchan Aruch about the laws of Kiddush.
We're done.
Yeah, we're done with those things.
Take them.
Yeah, absolutely. You can take a copy of the Shulchan Aruch.
Is the story of Abaye, is that to teach the philosopher that you can have the candles burning well into the night?
I didn't realize that, but it seems that that's the case.
Yeah. Okay.
Or at least in the first instance, you should have your meal in the presence of your candles.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll let you know.